Our story comes from the Gospel of John, and we're going to look at John chapter 5, verses 1 through 9. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there in Jerusalem, by the sheep gate, a pool, in Aramaic called Bethesda, some translations say Bethsaida, which has 5 roofed colonnades. In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there, he knew that he had already been there a long time. He said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I am going down, another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Get up, take up your bed, and walk." And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. Now that day was the Sabbath. John chapter 5, verse 1 through 9. Jesus, as it says, returned back to Jerusalem. You know, most of Jesus' ministry, as we learn from the Synoptic Gospels, which that's Matthew, Mark, and Luke, most of Jesus' ministry, likely 90% or more, was spent north in Galilee. Galilee is about 100 miles north of Jerusalem. It's more of the small towns, the suburbs, right? If Denver was Jerusalem, then we're up here, down here in Galilee, on the outskirts, a little further, more small towns. And this is where Jesus would spend much of his time, Nazareth and Capernaum and Tiberias and these other cities, performing ministry, healing people, teaching, gaining a following, walking on the water. A lot of the things that we see Jesus do happens right around that Sea of Galilee where he calls his disciples. And so much of his ministry is there. However, the Gospel of John, which is not one of those synoptic Gospels, means it's not the same pattern as the other three. It tells the story in a little bit different of a way. John gives us many more occasions of Jesus being in Jerusalem. In fact, in John chapter 4, Jesus was in Jerusalem, then he leaves Jerusalem, and that's when he talks with the Samaritan woman and has that conversation on the way back to Galilee. And here we're in John chapter 5, and he's coming right back. John would give us essentially these highlights. Jesus does a lot of ministry north in Galilee, but he comes down to Jerusalem for these festivals, these pilgrimage festivals. There's 3 of them in the Jewish calendar, right? It's either Passover or Shavuot or Sukkot. One of these would be these festivals. Now, we're not told in this story which one it is, and it doesn't necessarily matter, but we do know that Jesus, along with all the other able-bodied Jews, would have been traveling to Jerusalem. And so it's crowded. Every time Jesus is in Jerusalem, there's a great crowd because Jesus is always there for one of these festivals, one of these holidays. And everyone comes into town. And these are the moments, these high moments, you may think, where Jesus is getting near to these principalities and powers. This Sanhedrin, this Jewish ruling council, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the temple is there in Jerusalem. And so John gives us these moments, these highlighted moments when Jesus comes down to Jerusalem. And I say down, it says up because he's going up in elevation, but he's going south on the calendar, or on the map. Let's say on the calendar. He's going south on the map. So Jesus is here in Jerusalem, and Jesus goes to this specific area. It says this pool by the sheep gate, Bethesda. Or again, there's other translations that might say Bethsaida, and there's a few variations. But we have begun to figure out really where this is, and it's not too far from the temple. The temple is this grand structure that stood for a long time there in Jerusalem, and it had stood there, and Herod the Great had expanded the temple, and this massive structure with the courtyard and the temple colonnades and all the stuff that's there. It's a massive structure. And just nearby, not too far, is this pool. And it tells us that there's a multitude of invalids. Those blind, sick, lame, paralyzed, and any other disease you may want to think of, you can go ahead and throw that in. That's who's gathered there. So I want us to, if we could, just think about it as that part of town. Have you ever been in a city where, I'm going to try to avoid that part of town? When I was younger in ministry, I worked at a large church. And it was a large church, but I was no one important. I was just this little associate that cleaned the closets and swept the floors. and which I needed. But I worked there at this large church, and the church is located downtown. This is a small town in South Carolina called Spartanburg, not too much bigger than here in Castle Rock. This church had been there for over 100 years, and the town had grown up around it, and so it was located right downtown. Now, they built this youth building right next door, and that's actually where I worked. I had an office there, and I would work there, and I would stay there late into the night, hanging out with my friends. In fact, playing sand volleyball. It was a lot of fun. We shot basketball at the 3-on-3 court. This was a fun building to hang out in. It was the youth building. And this is just before I was married and just after I was married, so still young enough to have some fun and to get into a little bit of trouble and all that kind of stuff. But we would stay up late at the building. Now, just across the parking lot, literally right across the parking lot, they built a bus station. And with the bus station came with it a certain type of person that was always hanging around the bus station. Spartanburg, this little town, wasn't a destination city, but a lot of people would get off of the bus mainly because their money had just run out. They bought a bus ticket and got as far as they could go, and then they had to get off the bus, and here they are in Spartanburg, probably never heard of it. And many of them were sick, in wheelchairs, homeless, diseased. What you might say is the lower end, the bottom end of society that typically you might want to avoid. And many times they'd come up to us at the church while we were trying to hang out and play and talk and all this stuff, and they'd ask for help, ask for money, and at times we were able to help as often as we could. But if I'm honest with you, when I would be up at the church, I would hope on those evenings that bus wouldn't show up. If I could just kind of avoid that whole group of people that were going to get off the bus and come disturb us and bother us and ask for help or ask for money or ask for whatever it may be, as these people are just kind of stuck in this town. I'm confessing this to you. I hate that was in my heart, but it was. And then I think about Jesus here. There was no secret that this part of town was filled with these people. Everyone knew that that's where they were, and yet Jesus could have just avoided them, could have gone around the other way, could have missed them altogether, and yet he goes right into this area. He goes right to this multitude of invalids, sick and lame and paralyzed and homeless and diseased, and probably a lot of mental health things going on. And there was a lot of all of this, and we're familiar right there in this place by this pool. Now, what I love about this, of course, I say this often here at the church, I believe that Jesus reveals to us what God the Father is like. I believe it's one of the primary purposes of Jesus. He shows us what humanity ought to live like, and he shows us what God is like, where we may have misunderstood or misunderstood what God was like through the stories of the Old Testament. Jesus comes to bring clarity to what God is like. And God, ever since the beginning, from Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3, has been pursuing and coming after his people. And man, do we keep screwing up. We keep messing up, and we keep turning the wrong way, and we keep doing the wrong things, and we keep messing up again and again and again. I know I have in my life, and perhaps you can testify to the same thing. And yet God, the whole story of the Old Testament, is God continually coming after his people, pursuing them. God comes to where the people are, and Jesus, in human form, shows us a good picture of that. He goes to the people. He does not abandon them. He does not go around them. He does not try to find another way. He goes right into this area. He goes right up to that bus station, and he waits for the bus to arrive for the people to get out that he might interact with them. And it's a conviction to me of the times that I try to avoid, that I try to walk around. Now, all these invalids are lying here, sitting here, hanging out in this area. Why are they there? Why are they at this place? I want us, if we could, let's put the scripture back on the screen. It tells us in verse 4 why they are there. So let's all take a look at the screen and find verse 4. Now, some of you may have caught this when we first put it up. Many of you may have missed it. You might notice it jumps from verse 3 right over to verse 5. Anyone catch that on the first go-around? That was subtle. In my translation here, the ESV translation, it jumps right over verse number 4. And the reason for that is many scholars tend to believe that verse was added later to give extra context to the story. Now, I want to read to you the note that is in my Bible for what's going on here for verse number 4. It says it this way. I'm trying to tap on it. There we go. Some manuscripts insert either all of this or some of this. I'm going to read it to you. So it says, in these lay a multitude of invalids, blind and lame and paralyzed. Here's what's inserted. Waiting for the moving of the water. Verse 4. For an angel of the Lord went down at certain seasons into the pool and stirred the water. Whoever stepped in first after the stirring of the water was healed of whatever disease he had. Now, this was added in later to help give some context as to why all of these sick people and paralyzed people and invalids are gathered around this pool. They were there because of this hopeful myth or legend. We don't know much about the healings that come from this angel or this spirit or whatever this may be that comes and stirs the water. We don't know how frequently it happens either. It says seasonally, so this is not something that happens every day at 5 o'clock. It may happen 1 or 2, maybe 3 times in a year. It may happen every few years. We're really not told, but there's this belief. There's this myth, you may call it a legend, that when the water is stirred up, that some type of angel, some type of spirit, some type of spiritual being has come and stirred the water up so that whoever gets in there first would be healed. That's the reason that this paralyzed man responds to Jesus the way that he does. When Jesus says, do you want to be healed? He says, I have no one to help me get into the water, and someone else always cuts in front of me and gets in before I do. There's this myth. There's this legend. So all these people there, similar to us, long for healing in some way, long for relief, some type of remedy to the ailments of their life. Again, whether they be physical or whether they be mental or spiritual, emotional, whatever they may be, we long for relief. We long for a remedy. We long for some type of healing that we'll reach out to try to grab that. And there was this belief, if I could just get into the pool, when it stirs up, maybe I could find healing. Maybe I could find relief in some way. Maybe I will be healed at least partly or temporarily. There was some type of belief. People will do whatever they can do to find healing. You know, we talked a few weeks ago about the woman that had the issue of blood, the bleeding woman that had spent all of her money on doctors and nurses and healers and medicines and had not found any type of healing yet until she came to Jesus. And she had spent all of her money and she was poor and now destitute, so sick but also poor because she was reaching out to try to grab whatever she could and believe in whatever she could to find healing, and she continually came up empty. The truth is, a lot of us are in this same position where we want to believe, where we turn to things in life to find some type of relief. When I think about this story, I can't help but think of some of the friends in my life that have struggled with addiction. Maybe you know someone in your life that struggled through addiction in some way. Maybe you have in the past. Maybe you are currently struggling with some addiction, and I'm glad that you're here, if so. You know, those who struggle with addiction aren't doing so because they have some higher proclivity to sin than you and I. They're not worse sinners than me or you. They're not worse in some way. They weren't born predisposed to have more sin. That's not what causes those addictions. Most commonly, those who struggle with addiction, they're trying to cope. They're trying to process some type of trauma, some type of issue or problem, some negative, some terrible thing that has happened to them, and they're trying to find some type of relief. They're reaching out to find something, and they have found a temporary relief in this drug or this thing they've seen on the internet or this person or alcohol or whatever it may be. They're reaching and grasping at something. I've known these people. You've known these people. We all tend to want to reach and grab and believe in the things that can hopefully bring us healing, whether they are true or not, whether they are going to be everlasting healing or not. You see, today, in our day and age, we live in a very social media driven age. Most of us in here are probably on social media. If you're not, shout out to you. You are likely wiser than the rest of us. But social media, which again can be used for good or bad, of course, in the social media age where everything can be found online at the touch of your fingertips, at the tip of your fingertips in a moment's notice, there's so much information out there, right? And at the same time, there's so much misinformation out there. And so we never know if it's true or it's not true. It's this information and this sounds good and I want to believe it because I want it to help my life, but I'm not quite sure. It was just a few days ago, in fact, as I was thinking through this message, this video came up on my feed. You know, sometimes you're there scrolling, and this video pops up of this doctor. And I've seen this, it's a female doctor. I've seen her before. She shared some things. The algorithm must know that I've watched it before and it sent me another one, right? That's how it works. And she's explaining this important thing. She said, did you know that there are certain chemicals in toothpaste? Some of those crunchy people out there are like, She said there's certain chemicals in toothpaste. So here's actually what you ought to do. Did you know that there are certain minerals and vitamins in pickles that help with your teeth, that help with your gums? And they help, and you should drink some pickle juice at night before you go to bed. And there's actually some substance on the pickle that helps with your enamel. So in the morning, you eat pickles, and this helps, and it can just replace the need for toothpaste. At the end of the video, some of you see where this is going. At the end of the video, the doctor gets back on and says, here's actually the truth. I made all that up. She's made it up. I don't recommend just eating pickles in place of brushing your teeth. She just made all this up, but there was hundreds and hundreds of people that had responded to another one of her videos where she didn't give the ending that she had also just made up. And she says, see, this is what happens for people who just want to grasp and reach and say, I need some type of help or some type of healing or some type of relief or some type of advice or something to help me, and they'll believe whatever it may be. And on the internet today, it's all over the place everywhere, and you may buy into this thing and it may not be real at all. It may be just this legend, this myth. It may bring relief, but only for a quick moment. It may bring relief, but at what cost? We live in this day and age, and Jesus understands this. Now, Jesus approaches this man. He had been an invalid, it says, for 38 years. I just want us to try to wrap our head around 38 years. We know from the context of the story he was paralyzed. He could not walk. Now, we don't know if he was born this way or if this was some accident that happened, but either way, 38 years is a long, long time to be stuck in this position, to be sick or diseased or hurt or afflicted in some way and need healing and have nothing that you can do about it, but he has this belief or hope that if he can get into that water, he can be healed, but he has not yet been able to get into the water for 38 years. This man has likely lost all of his family. If he had a family that was close by that loved him, you know where he would be instead of by this pool? He'd be with his family. People that have families and that have money, they can get sick too and be paralyzed as well, but they can be taken care of by their family. But this man finds himself around all these other invalids and sick people in that part of town, around this pool, and he has no one there with him to help him bring him healing. And Jesus asks a very interesting question. It's what I want us to ponder on for the rest of our time. It says, because he had been sick for so long, Jesus asked him, do you want to be healed? Do you want to be healed? To ask the man that has been paralyzed for 38 years, do you want to be healed? It can seem like a silly question. It can seem like a dull or an obvious question. Jesus, certainly you know this man wants to be healed. Why are we asking, do you want to be healed? And yet again, Jesus is teaching us something that's important for us to consider. You see, with healing comes change. You lose what has been familiar to you. When you're healed, when you find the healing that takes you from one place to the next place, you leave behind what once was. You leave behind what was familiar. This whole life of this man was gathered around with these people at that pool, and Jesus says, hey, do you want to be healed? Because it's going to mean there's changes that are going to take place. And we are asked the same question by Jesus. Again, it might be physical healing or it might be something else. It might be a sin, an addiction, a struggle, a trauma, something that's happened to you or something you've done, but this thing that sits in your life that weighs on your shoulders, Jesus can say, hey, do you want to be healed? Because with healing comes change, and change is scary. The truth is, the longer we sit with these things, and for some of us, we've sat with some things for a long time, maybe not 38 years, or maybe longer. Or maybe it's been a year or two, or it's been a decade or two, and you've sat with this thing, whatever it may be, that weighs heavy on your shoulders, that sits there with you. And over time, here's what takes place. That thing becomes our identity. It becomes who we are. And we wouldn't know how to describe ourselves in any other way other than including that thing, whatever it may be, however big or small. For some of you, I wrote a few down. For some of you, you're saying, hey, I'm just a scattered person who's always late. You think, does Jesus care about that? I think He does. I think Jesus cares about all the things of our life, even the small things that we think might be insignificant. Jesus wants to heal us in all the ways. Well, I'm just a scattered person. I've got all these irons in the fire, and I'm always late. And so people always know that, and they talk about me in that way, but I'm always late to things, and I don't show up, and I'm behind, and I'm scattered, and that's just who I am. And if you weren't able to describe yourself in that way, you wouldn't even know what to say. It's become who you are. Well, I'm just busy. I'm never available. I feel this one because I'm as guilty as any of you on saying I'm busy. Every time I'm asked how things are going, I'm quick to say, busy. And how many of us take this busy and just wear it as a badge of honor, and we don't actually have time for the things that we should have time for, but we're always saying we're busy doing this and that and the other, and we don't make time for people in the right way, and we don't do the things God maybe has led us to do, and we just say, oh, I'm so busy, and we're like, hey, look at me, look how busy I am, and what we're really saying is, look how important I am, that's why I'm so busy. And if we didn't know how to say that, if we couldn't give that as our answer, then we wouldn't know what to say about ourselves. It becomes our identity. I'm just a screw up, and my life will never be right. I can't get things right. Some of you sit with this. I'm just a screw up. And maybe it's with relationships, and you've gone from relationship to relationship, maybe romantically, and these relationships aren't working, or your friends keep leaving, or with your spouse, or with your kids, or with your neighbors, and you just have all these problems with whatever relationship you're in, and it's like, man, I'm just a screw up, and I can't maintain these relationships well, and you wouldn't know how to describe yourself without saying this is who you are. Maybe it's financial, and you're always screwing up and getting behind, and you're going from job to job, and all these things, and you can't get a right grip on what you need to grip, but it is becoming who you are. And it's just how you describe your own self. I'm just a guy with a short temper. I know lots of guys that just wear that around like a badge of honor. Don't mess with me. You'll find out what's coming to you. And they're proud of it. And that type of masculinity looks nothing like Jesus, by the way. Does Jesus want to heal us of that? Yes, He does. And if Jesus were to say, hey, do you want to be healed from all those things? Because what it's going to mean is you can't describe yourself in those ways. That's a big question that we face, because we begin to believe these things that we say over ourselves over and over. And the truth is, we believe the things that other people say to us. I believe one of the saddest questions asked in the Bible takes place very early on, early in the book of Genesis. God is in perfect fellowship with Adam and Eve. The serpent comes into the story and tempts Adam and Eve, and they fail, they fall, they eat of the apple. right? The fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and their eyes are open and they are ashamed. They're filled with shame, and then they realize that they are naked. And so what do? They run and hide. And then what does God do? We already talked about this. This is what God always does. He's coming after them. He's pursuing them. He's looking for them. He's walking through looking for this creation of His whom He loves. And then He finds them, and they were hiding. And they said, well, we were hiding because we were ashamed, and we were ashamed because we were naked. And God asked this question. I think it's one of the saddest questions. God said, who told you you were naked? Who told you? Who told you that you were naked? Who told you that you needed to be filled with shame? Who told you that you were lazy, that you were stupid, that you were no good, that you were messed up, that you were just this wicked person? Who told you these things that you begin to believe about yourself? Who told you? I want us to believe the truth of what God has to say about us more than what the world might accuse us of. Who told you that you were these things? Who told you? Who told you to be filled with shame? This man's life was centered around this truth of his ailment, of his disease. To be healed would be to change his life. He would no longer be in this place that has become familiar. For us, it's the things we believe about ourselves. It's the things that other people might accuse us of, and we believe them so much to the point where they just become our identity. And yet Jesus asks us, do you want to be healed? I think for me, a season in my life, I've shared some of my story here and there. I had a point where I needed to be healed theologically. And you're going, what does that mean exactly? I grew up in a certain faith tradition, and I'm not going to be specific about that because I'm not saying all these other faith traditions and denominations are wrong. Please don't hear that. But for me, as I grew up, I realized that I needed to rethink some things. That the God that I had understood, I had placed inside of a box. And I don't think He fit in that box. And I began more and more to be convicted that He didn't fit inside this bubble, this box that I had created or that I had understood in this certain church tradition. And God needed to heal me of that. But here's where it actually mattered, because those are just thoughts and theoretical and all that. When we made the decision to move across the country to Castle Rock, Colorado and start Meadows Church, that was a big deal. And we were at the time still associated with that denomination and church tradition and that group. And they were very helpful, by the way. And with them came a lot of brotherhood and community things and assistance and financial help and all that. And yet I had to say, do I want to be healed of this? Do I want to actually step away and embrace something new? Because with it would be a great challenge and a great risk. And I'm going to step away from what's familiar, and we're going to plant the church without that group and trust God to provide on His own. That was a huge risk that we took. And I'm thankful that we did. I'm thankful that we trusted the Lord, that we didn't say, well, it's more familiar to be back here, so I'm just going to stay with this even though I don't feel like I belong here. No, I'm thankful that the Lord led us to step out of that, to trust Him in a new way. And I don't know what that thing may be for you, but I believe we all need healing in some way from something. And God is asking you today. Again, I'm going to invite you in a minute to come for prayer. God is asking you today this question: do you want to be healed? Only you can answer that. Only you know what the costs that will come with it are. You see, the truth is, after this story takes place, after this man is healed, the Pharisees respond, and the Pharisees, as usual, were not happy about this. They believed that the law of Moses was given to them and that Jesus healed the man. When was it? It tells us on the Sabbath, and you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath. So how dare you, Jesus, heal this man on the Sabbath? That's working. You shouldn't have done that. And the Pharisees weren't too excited about it. This happens more than once, by the way, with these stories of Jesus. Now, I don't think we have the same scenario with the Pharisees, but here's what is true for us. When we are healed and when we step from one place to the next, when we are healed, there will be people in your life that aren't happy about it. Sadly, that is the truth. Now, I'm thankful for the ones who are excited and are welcoming you in and are high-fiving you and they're saying, come on, this is amazing. And I pray that that's the church, by the way. Let's be that. But there will be people that aren't too happy of the healing. Usually they fall into one or two groups. It's the ones that were there with you. We've heard the phrase before, misery loves company. Well, who do you think you are leaving us right here? You're no better than us. You'll be back. And they're not happy that we're trying to better ourselves or embrace a next step or move closer towards the healing that we need. Sadly, on the other side, there's Christians at times that are judgmental. And I say this because I was that Christian for a long time. And I have repented of that, and the Lord has forgiven me of that, and He has healed me from that. Praise the Lord. But Christians who are judgmental, that will remind you of where you came from and the things that you have done, and that you're not quite one of us yet. Sadly, that takes place also. That's more of what the Pharisees were feeling. That's more of the category that they fell in this moment. Well, we know where you came from. We know that part of town. We saw you get off the bus. We know your disease. We know your sin. We know your addiction. You're not quite one of us yet. You may be met with those things. There will be people in your life that may not be thrilled that you have found healing, but we must live as though we are healed anyway. Here's how we end the story today. We jump ahead just a few verses. Verse 14, right after this moment, Jesus says this, verse 14, afterward Jesus found him, the man, in the temple and said to him, see, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you. Jesus says, see, you are well. I want us to just stop. When Jesus heals you, you are healed. Amen? There's no greater healing than that comes from Jesus. Jesus gave of His life and died upon the cross that He might bring you the perfect and complete healing. He says, you are healed. And then He gives a warning. Go and sin no more. Something Jesus says often. Go and sin no more, that you may not be drugged back down here where you once were. That nothing worse may happen to you. Now, the truth is we are all going to sin and keep messing up as we move forward. That will happen. But when we begin to turn and embrace that life of sin, we embrace these things that we've been saved from, that we've been healed from, sin has a tendency to drag us back down. Sin has a tendency to pull us back down. And Jesus says, go and sin no more. Meaning walk a life in the healing that you've been given. Embrace that life. Live healed. Because you are made well. Live healed. If you receive healing from something today, if you come down and receive prayer, walk out of this place thinking, I'm going to walk forward out of what that was. I'm not going to leave thinking, well, it's probably going to come back around tomorrow. Well, I'm probably still going to have to deal with it. Walk and live as though you are healed and believe that Jesus can heal you. Because here's the truth. This man was sick for 38 years and he was healed in a moment. You may have been struggling with something for a year, for 2 years, for 5 years, for 10 years, for 50 years in your life that's been sitting on you, and I want us to believe that Jesus can heal you in a moment. He can do it. We don't have to wait around for some myth or legend or some video that we see on the internet. We don't have to wait around for this or that, hoping and grasping at straws. We can come to the very one who can bring us the healing that we need, and His name is Jesus. And I pray we cling to Him today. And so here's what I'd love to invite you to do. I want you to come and receive prayer. Again, I don't know what the thing is. I don't know if it's physical. I don't know if it's mental. It could be some form of addiction or sin struggle. It could be financial. It could be relational. It could be any number of things. But whatever this thing is for you, it is weighing on you. It is keeping you down on your mat. And Jesus says, get up. Get up. And you've got to believe. I want you to believe that Jesus can bring healing.